We are going to be live on LinkedIn Live as well, and that's where the live chat and the slideshow happens. I can't really broadcast the slideshow to LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live and the Google Meet all at the same time. So that's one of the challenges we run into. Welcome, welcome. For those of you joining on the Google Meet, you can stay here on the Google Meet and join the conversation. Just so you know, over on LinkedIn Live, if you go to Adaptive Challenge Consulting on LinkedIn Live, that's where you'll also see the live chat and the slideshow. Last week, we were able to do the slideshow on the Google Meet. This week, I'm having some tech issues and just life issues, just a little behind on life at the moment. Yeah. So if you want to participate in the chat and see the slideshow, join me over on LinkedIn Live. Again, though, the slideshow, not a big deal because we'll be talking about this content either way. One other advantage of the LinkedIn Live side is that you can join the live chat, which is cool. But again, if you're just here to listen in and get some knowledge and participate in the conversation that way, that's great as well. Is anybody able to give me a thumbs up that they can hear me, or in the chat that you can hear me? Just want to check the technology. All right, so we're starting in about a minute here, so bear with me. And the LinkedIn audience is building right now. And I'm going to pull up a few links to try to put in the chat over on LinkedIn. While I'm doing that, either on the LinkedIn side, which is this camera, or the Google Meet side, which is this camera, if anybody unable to hear me. Okay, let's see here. How about now? Can you hear me now? Let's see here. Gotcha. Jonathan or Elena or Stephanie or any of the other folks that are on the Google Meet, are you able to give me a thumbs up or some sign that you can hear me? I can't hear, but I think I saw you mouth my name. Yes, I just did say. So let's see here. I'm going to jump off and then jump back on. All right, LinkedIn crowd, bear with me 1 minute while I'm getting the Google crowd in as well. Hopefully this will, what's the conventional wisdom? Turn things off and turn them back on, and then it'll be good. All right. So now I'm turning back to my Google crowd. Are y'all able to hear me on the Google side now? Google side, anybody can give me a thumbs up? Okay, we got more people coming in on the Google side and more people coming in on the LinkedIn side. Great. So hopefully you can hear me on the Google Meet side. We're having some tech issues. The LinkedIn side. Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Thank you for the you got this. But we are ready to go. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Again, if you're in the Google Meet, that's fine. You can still be in the conversation. If you want to join us on LinkedIn Live, you'll have the benefit of seeing the slideshow and also participating in the live chat. For those of you on the LinkedIn side, on the live chat, if you want to let us know where you're joining us from, that would be amazing. And I imagine, again, I'm turning to the Google Meet folks to make sure you can hear me okay. And I'm going to make sure my Bluetooth is off in case I'm getting. Is anybody over on the Google side able to confirm for me that you can hear me? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Great. So here we are. Welcome on LinkedIn Live. Welcome on Google Meet to our conversation today. And so today, the conversation is about intercultural competence in leadership. So this is a serious topic. This is a very important topic. And if you've been following along, I've been sort of going chapter by chapter through my book. My book you can see up in the top corner if you're on the LinkedIn Live with me. But the book is Leading with Emotional Intelligence. It's available on my website, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com, but it's also available on Amazon if that's your preference, and it comes in a Kindle version on Amazon as well. But different chapters are different, and they address different things. And so today, the chapter we're gonna kind of check in on is cultural awareness and leadership. This is huge, and there's a lot of information in the media, a lot of misinformation, a lot of conversation about DEI, about CRT, etc. And I can help demystify all of those letters, all of those phrases, to kind of break them down into their simplest terms. Because even though there are some people in media circles who use those abbreviations to try to communicate things that aren't really represented by those words, but per the people who invented those things, it can be tricky. So, for example, this is just an aside, but critical race theory, CRT. I had the good fortune to be at a conference in Nashville literally a month before the pandemic, and I got to hear Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw speak at that conference. And if you don't know, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw is one of the first people to coin the term critical race theory. And so I got to hear directly from Stephanie from Black Forest in southern Germany. Guten Abend, I guess it is in Deutschland. Mein Vater ist Deutscher. Willkommen. But anyway, so I get to hear from the creator of one of the creators of critical race theory, who is a legal scholar. She's a scholar of law, what critical race theory really was. And so I have many people in my community who watch media that sort of misleads them as far as what critical race theory is and isn't. And it's easy to mislead people because sometimes they're scared. And when you are part of a culture and you hear things about another culture, fear can be a part of what you experience. Discomfort can be part of what you experience. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So when you think about cultural awareness and leadership, one of the things is that it has to start with us understanding and owning our own culture. So here's one of the things that's hard, is that our own culture largely is not easy to perceive about ourselves. In other words, there are things that I was taught that were just the way things are, and I continue to do those things. And it wasn't until young adulthood that I understood that the way things are was bound to the culture I was raised in. So for me, for example, my mom is from Indiana. Her family is from New York and Michigan. My father's from Germany, right off the boat, German. Günther Herbert Siegfried Mueller. And so the things that they told me were the right ways to do things are the way I believed were the right ways to do things. And I didn't get to participate in another culture to sort of reflect that. But let me give you two examples, though, about the culture clash between my two families and give you kind of a peek into how I got into studying cultural awareness in a leadership framework. So, for example, around the holidays, we would celebrate Christmas in my family. And my U.S. grandmother and my German grandmother both lived in the same town, but on opposite sides of the tracks. My U.S. grandmother lived on the wealthier side of town, and my German grandmother lived on the very poor side of town. And when Christmas would come around, I would go on Christmas Eve. My family and I would go on Christmas Eve to spend time with the German side of the family. And it was this robust, boisterous, loud celebration on Christmas Eve. And people were yelling, mostly happy yelling, sometimes angry yelling. The food was amazing. When it came time to open presents, everyone just opened presents, right? My grandmother and grandfather had, I think, total 5 grandchildren in the U.S. And so there was just this robust immigrant family that was, again, we were kind of loud. The house was crumbling out from under us. It was not a well-built house. And it was like opening the presents was like a free-for-all on Christmas Eve. Then we would drive across town, literally to the other side of the tracks. And my U.S. grandmother had a very, very nice home. She lived just a few blocks from the country club. And she had guest rooms for the kids and a guest room for my parents, and we would go there and we would sleep overnight. And then the next morning we would wake up and get in our Sunday best, you know, and we would sit at a table and have a brunch, a brunch where there were more than one fork per person at the table, right? So sort of equating the fine dining thing. And then after everybody had finished brunch, and this was really tough as like a 11 and 12-year-old when you wanted to open presents. After everybody had finished brunch and we had cleaned up from brunch, we would go over to the fireplace by the Christmas tree, and then we would open the presents one at a time around the circle. And there was no yelling. The food was good, but the way that the entire culture was different. So I didn't know it at the time, but this was me starting to understand different parts of culture. These are both parts of my experience of white culture, right? I'm a white dude, right? And so I had my US white side and my German white side. And these were two different models of whiteness, right? One of the things about majority cultures, particularly in the United States, whether it's whiteness, whether it's people who do not experience disability, whether it's people who are cisgendered, people who are heterosexual, whether it's men, any identity you have that puts you in the advantaged or privileged group on any spectrum, it's a little harder sometimes to pick apart and discern your culture because it just is presented to us as the norm, as the norm. And so the great news is I got this fractured norm as a white person, and I don't think a lot of white people get to have that experience. I think some white people who are the children of immigrants get to have that experience too, but I was very, very fortunate in that regard. Similarly, again, my parents immigrated. My father and grandmother and grandfather and uncle and aunt immigrated from Germany right at the end of World War II. And similar to that, when I was young, there were certain movies that my father wouldn't let me see. And so I don't know if any of you were alive in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and I would love to hear in the chat. But if you were watching movies in the 70s and 80s and 90s like I was, I never ever saw a movie in which German people were portrayed as anything except the villains. Germans were always the villains in every movie that Hollywood was producing in the 70s and the 80s, into the mid 90s. Germans were always portrayed as villains. So my people in the media were always being portrayed as villains. I got this little, but I could also see other white people who weren't German being portrayed as heroes. So I got to see my people portrayed as villains and my people portrayed as heroes. That awareness, once I hit college and once I started zooming out from my own whiteness and started going, I wonder how the black community is stereotyped in the media. I wonder how the Latina or Latino or Latina community is stereotyped in the media. Suddenly I had this, thankfully I had this little peek into it, this tiny little peek into this that then opened up this whole world where my understanding that cultures are defined by our media, and that and to this day, and this is just me being real, so I hope y'all are ready. I hope you get ready. That to this day, because of the movies I saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when I hear someone use the word thug, I have to be honest with myself. Every time I heard the word thug, you know who was being shown on screen was a black person, overwhelmingly black men, right? That's what I was taught by the media, that is what a thug is. So to be an anti-racist person, to be a culturally aware leader, I have to acknowledge that that's a real thing that gets evoked in my brain. It's real. It is. Number two, I have to then challenge it and be like, wait a second. All Germans aren't villains. I learned that early on. Therefore, whatever the media is telling me about black people, whatever the media is telling me about Latina people, whatever the media is telling me about Asian people or our indigenous communities or transgender people or gay people or disabled people, whatever the media, whatever these Hollywood movies are doing to try to fit things into a 90-minute to 120-minute runtime to make the story move forward, and all the little shortcuts that they're doing, where overwhelmingly these movies are written by white folks, or written by people who have some kind of privilege, writing about characters that they might not understand, and they perpetuate these stereotypes even further. So I just wanted to say that as an introduction, in that I was very fortunate that that I come from someone whose family had been in the U.S. for several generations in New York and Michigan, and then in Indiana, and then a immigrant who was right off the boat, who came here when he was all of 8 years old, and thought everybody, before he immigrated here, he thought everybody in the United States were cowboys because German media portrayed everybody in the U.S. as cowboys. And he came to Central North Carolina, and I'm sure he was going, where are all the cowboys? And so I wanted to kind of give that as an intro into this conversation. So next, I want to talk about sort of communicating across cultural differences. And so one of the things that, and I've sort of foreshadowed this a little bit, but the idea is that cultural awareness and leadership doesn't start with you exploring cultures that aren't yours. That's not where it starts. A lot of people think, well, it starts by me trying to understand other cultures that have been marginalized, kept to the sides, cultures who are not centered on in our discussions. I'm going to start by trying to understand and identify. If I'm a white guy, I'm going to like listen to some hip hop to try to identify, right? I'm going to tell my black, and this is going to show you all my age here, right? I'm going to tell my one black colleague or my two black colleagues at work, oh my gosh, I really love Earth, Wind, and Fire, because I'm like trying to relate, right? That's not where this starts. That is not where culturally aware leadership starts. Where culturally aware leadership starts is, can I identify cultures I am a part of? And I do this with a lot of teams. I do this with executives. I do this with emerging leaders, up and coming leaders. And a lot of times, there's one client in particular I'm thinking of. It's sort of a predominantly white university that I work with. And between day 1 and day 2 of training, I often ask people, I say, for homework, I want you to bring tomorrow morning something that you find funny about your culture. Something that you find funny about your culture. Here's the thing I've experienced over and over and over again. I almost never, there are a few exceptions, I almost never hear white people come the next morning with something they find funny about white culture. Because part of this means part of what privilege insulates us from is the belief that our culture is a culture and has edges. Every culture that is juxtaposed against a dominant culture, right, the disabled community, that is juxtaposed against a world that's built around people who are not them, they know the edges of their culture exceptionally well because it's juxtaposed against this broader dominant culture. Same with the Black diaspora in the United States and the Latinx community and any community that's not primarily white men and white cisgender men and white men who are cisgendered and not currently disabled. And so one of the things that's interesting about the United States is that the boundaries of culture are harder to discern among people in the majority culture. I have literally had, I'm going to laugh when I say this, I've literally had white people struggling to do this activity come up to me and say, well, I think tallness is a culture. I'm tall, and I think being tall is a culture. And y'all can't tell this on the square, on the little rectangle here. I'm 6'2". Tallness is not a culture. There's not enough shared experiences that make us a culture. But what this speaks to is that people from dominant cultures have a hard time identifying their cultures. And this is where culturally aware leadership begins. Can you identify a culture that you are part of that is a privileged culture, that is a majority culture? What is, and I'm going to just play the odds here statistically because I've got some folks on LinkedIn, I've got some folks on Google Meet. What is cisgender culture? What is cisgender culture? I don't know. I'm cisgender. If you don't know the term cisgender, it means when I was born, the doctor was like, it's a boy, and the doctor happened to guess right, right? And the doctors guess right 95% of the time. They have a pretty good success rate. And the trans community and the non-binary community, whose genders develop over time and are nuanced and complicated and have nothing to do with their biology, that my doctor was like, it's a boy, and I happen to be a man, right? So my doctor got it right, but that means I'm cisgender. But what does it mean to have a culture? What does cisgender culture consist of? It's hard for me to name. Because 95% of the people I know are cisgender. And And many people I know don't know someone who's transgender or non-binary. And so if they don't even know a person like that, it's harder to understand where cisgender culture begins and ends. Similarly, those of you who know me know that I'm in a Divine Nine NPHC organization. And if you're unfamiliar with the NPHC are the 9 largest historically black fraternities and sororities in the United States. I'm a white dude who got invited in. And I can tell I get to spend time surrounded by black culture, but my white culture is always there with me. But from time to time, that helps me understand the boundaries of white culture better. I hope that makes some sense. So if you come from a majority culture, and maybe it's that you're not disabled, maybe it's that you're cisgender, maybe you're heterosexual, maybe you're neurotypical, whatever that means, and put some air quotes intentionally there. Maybe you are not an immigrant. There are other things that make us us, where you have some privilege, and most of us, I think everybody on this call probably has some things that privilege them and some things that do not. Me personally, there's almost nothing in my life that does not privilege me, right? I tell people I got like the Costco size 24 pack of privilege when I was born, which is like all the extra privileges. I got them without lifting a finger, without doing a thing, right? But so the question I would ask you is, everybody on this call, is what's a majority culture that you're part of, and how would you describe that culture? And this is hard. This is hard. There's a great comedian that does a web series called Adam Ruins Everything. And so if you want to, this is a great series. One of the videos he does is about redlining. And if you're not familiar with the practice of redlining, Adam Ruins Everything Redlining Edition, look it up, because number one, it's funny. Number two, it's poignant. Number three, it includes Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. I think who has written extensively on racial inequities in our country. And so, but the lead in, again, Adam is a comedian. So what I appreciate about him is that he's using comedy to kind of grapple with the history of redlining. And the intro of this, and we're talking about how do you define a majority culture. The intro of this video is he's with Adam is in this man's house. This man's a white man. He's got a son who's also a white kid, and Adam says, "Yeah, you live in a very white neighborhood." And the owner of the house says, "Well, no. Segregation ended a long time ago. And then Adam says, "Yeah, it's still a white neighborhood." And the man opens the window and looks outside the window. And this is so funny because outside the window, he sees a white woman with like a public radio tote bag, like an NPR tote bag full of kale, and like a soy latte in her hand, and a dog wearing a sweater, right? And so, like, every trope about whiteness that you can like cobble together right there, right? And so then the guy closes the window and he goes, "Yeah, no, I guess this is a very white neighborhood." And so I'm saying that because, again, those tropes, until you start asking yourself the question what those tropes are, they don't seem like tropes. In other words, ask yourself this question: are all white people that you see portrayed in movies carrying an NPR tote bag full of kale with a dog in a sweater and a soy latte? No. White people are portrayed in so many different ways. Sure, we do have that stereotype, but we've got hundreds of stereotypes, thousands of stereotypes that play on different aspects of our identities, not whiteness squarely, right? Whereas racially minoritized communities deal with stereotypes that are squarely situated around their race, right? And so this is one of my challenges to you, is to think about cultures that you're part of that do not make your life harder or that make your life easier, privileged cultures you're part of, and try to more actively identify those. That is where culturally aware leadership starts. Can you laugh at things? Can you laugh at those things? I was an improv comedian at a comedy club in North Carolina for almost 10 years. And improv is not like stand-up comedy. I'm not telling jokes, but it's kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway? There's a team of people, and we would make up scenes on the spot, which was great mental exercise. And side note, has made me a way better keynote speaker than I was before. But in comedy, among the stand-up comedy crowd, there's a rule called punching up. What that means is that if a woman gets on stage and makes jokes about men, well, we all know consciously and or subconsciously that men have held much more power than women in the United States since its founding. And so punching up is when a woman gets on stage and makes a joke about a man, it's punching up. It's I'm picking on someone who systemically has more power, or at the very least has had more power over history, right? Often, usually it's both. Punching up. If a black comic gets up and makes jokes about white people, we are all free to laugh. If a white person gets up and tells jokes about black people, that's not punching up. At least in the United States, where white people have dominated and created cultures and laws and systems around our needs. In that context, that is not punching up, right? A white person getting on stage and doing jokes about black people. And so the comedy rule of punching up is very aware that there is an up, right? That our cultures, as we start naming and understanding our cultures have different power. And the harder it is to name and describe your culture, the more likely it is that your culture is a privileged culture. And I'm going to say that one more time. The harder it is for you to describe a culture that you're part of that privileges you, that gives you some advantage, the harder that is for you. I just lost my train of thought. The harder that is for you, the more likely it is it's a privileged identity. Right? So I'm going to go to the next slide, but if there's anybody in the chat that wants to add anything or ask any questions, I do see Stephanie mentioned my German husband has made similar reflections and comments. Yes, about the way Germans are portrayed. And again, my identities, I'm first gen German or second gen, depending on how you slice it, German American, but I'm also white, right? I'm white and I'm German, right? People in the Jewish diaspora, many of them also identify as white. Not all, but many Jewish people, particularly in the United States, also identify as white. And some don't, but they might be considered white passing by their communities. White passing is something that isn't about the identity I am internally. White passing is about what my community ascribes to me. And so there are people of various ethnicities that get ascribed white passing, whether they identify as white or not. And so in those contexts, again, when you think about media portrayals, there are sometimes someone might have an identity that it has been a marginalized identity when I think about the Jewish diaspora broadly, and a privileged identity where they might also be white, they might also be cisgender, etc. Right? There may be someone who is not Jewish but is like a white man who is also gay. So this individual has identities that privileges him and identities that don't. Of course, also different of our identities are more apparent to our communities. And when I say more apparent, I mean that our communities are always making educated guesses. They're always making educated guesses. The guesses aren't always right. The guesses are not always right. And so educated guesses about someone's race, someone's sexuality, someone's gender identity, those kinds of things. We are all making educated guesses all the time. And we need to frame them that way, that they are educated guesses and that they are not facts. That I cannot point to someone and tell you their race. I have a family member who will always, as long as she lives in the United States, be ascribed blackness when she walks into a room. And yet that's not the whole story. She is also Latina, right? But she will be ascribed blackness in every room she enters in the United States because of how she shows up, right? People will take educated guesses about her race and they'll get part of it right, part of it, but not all of it right. So next thing I want to talk about is starting with curiosity. And so starting with curiosity is once you can identify where the bounds of your culture are, instead of looking at other cultures and be like, that seems weird to me, because that's a natural thing. When I'm part of a culture, other cultures seem weird to me, and that's a natural, normal human thing. But if there are media folks out there who want to capitalize, and this is happening now, and I got to be real about this, media folks who want to capitalize on this discomfort to get you to tune into their news talk show or buy some product or be scared or be angry or something like that, to buy more things from them. They're capitalizing on our discomfort with difference, our discomfort with other cultures. And the way to stop that, the way to diffuse them capitalize on fear, is to replace fear with curiosity. Things that go, I wonder about this. I wonder about this. So, a real life experience of mine when I was in college, I went to a predominantly white university, not just a predominantly white university, the second whitest university in the North Carolina university system, the second least diverse when it comes to race university in our system. Through a weird twist of circumstances, I ended up joining the BSA Gospel Choir, the Black Student Association Gospel Choir. I think probably we had 90 or so members, and I think there was one white woman and me, as we were the two white people in the entire group. And so when I was there, we went on tour, and at some point the choir director was talking to the choir, and we were on tour. We're going on a tour through Baltimore, Annapolis, DC, singing in churches, singing in jails, singing in community centers. It was an amazing, amazing tour. And she goes, everybody needs to be on the bus at 11. She goes, I don't want to hear people talking about CPT. And I was like, and I turned over, like, I'm in the tenor section. I turned over to the other tenors. I'm like, what is, I don't know this, these letters, C, P, and like, what is CP and T? And they're like, oh, dude, it's not CP and T. And they explained to me, and you can look it up. You can Google it on your own time. It's not my phrase to use, but you can Google that if you're curious. But I was hanging out with people who shared a culture and had an understanding that was not part of my culture. And the choir director was saying, for this tour, that is, we're gonna I want to interrogate that norm, right? And so so as I learned about that and learned what it meant, I was like, oh, okay, well, sure. If that's part of your culture, then that's part of your culture, right? I'm not. It's not part of my culture. I've never heard that phrase. My people don't really have a comparable phrase. Here's the funny part, though. Here's the funny part. Every time I think about a stereotype, particularly of a minoritized group, I think, what's the opposite stereotype? What would be the flip stereotype? So if you've Googled what CPT is, or if you happen to know what CPT is, my question is, why are white people so obsessed with time? This would be examining my own culture. There is a minoritized culture that recognizes, when it's juxtaposed against a majority culture, that they might have a different relationship with time than that majority culture. And by the way, if you're with me, and you've traveled outside of the U.S. and outside of Europe, time is way more flexible than a lot of European cultures and U.S. culture consider time. And so, but my question is, I want to take that stereotype and I want to flip it and be like, why is it white people are so obsessed with timeliness? What's that about? I mentioned I'm in a historically black fraternity. We marched in a parade recently, and the call time was 11 a.m. And as a white guy, my part of my culture is, if they say it's the lineup time for the parade is 11 a.m., even though the parade doesn't start till 1, I'm there at 10:55, right? I have anxiety. I worry about letting people down if I'm not on time. That is not everyone, and that is distinctly part of my experience of white culture. That's part of the bounds of white culture. I said to our chapter president, I said, as the one white dude in the chapter, if you say the call time's at 11, I'm gonna, if it's 11:02 and I'm not there, you're gonna get a very emphatic apology from me on text message, right? And so I like to take those stereotypes sometimes and flip them. Starting with curiosity is also being able to say, I wonder why people I meet from this culture or a different culture do this. I've observed that people in this culture do this. I'm curious as to why that is. The last thing I'll mention from this slide is, and this goes back to some of my intro that I was giving, which is that there are media folks out there who want to capitalize on all of our discomfort with cultures that we are not part of. So right now, and I'm just gonna be real with you, there is a lot of fear mongering about drag queens and transgender people. Just a lot of, and given that transgender people represent roughly 1.5% of the population in the US, the discourse is so, with the discourse in certain media realms is so robust. You would imagine that 50% of the U.S. were transgender, identified as transgender. But so I'm going to tell this story of Tolkien, who's a dear friend of mine. Um, and so Tolkien was a student of mine at a small college, and she was part of a program run by the U.S. State Department that invited students from former Soviet republics to go to college in the United States. And so former Soviet republics, many of which I could not have named or found on a map: Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, all of these different countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union. In Tolkuen's case, she was from Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is a former Soviet, formerly part of the Soviet Union, but it's an independent country. And Tolkien was Muslim. That was her faith tradition. And something interesting, and I'm never going to forget this. This was shortly after 9/11 in the United States. And many of the international students for breaks couldn't go back home. And so faculty and staff, we would open up our homes and they would stay with us. And so over Thanksgiving break, or what my college called Thanksgiving break, we had Tolkien stay with us. We had, like, our baby, our oldest kid was, I think, like 1.5 years old. And so Tolkien stayed with us for, I don't know, 3 nights, 4 nights, something like that. And we cooked meals together, and she cooked for us and we cooked for her, and she played with the baby. And I learned so much about Kyrgyzstan that I otherwise never would have learned. And that was in November, around when a lot of people celebrate Thanksgiving. And fast forward to Christmas time, and I'm sitting there with my in-laws. And again, this is 2001. So this is shortly after 9/11. And my in-laws were watching media that was convincing them that essentially there was a Muslim terrorist around every corner, right? And because my in-laws didn't have friends who were Muslim, they had no way of checking this stereotype. The media was giving them this stereotype. They would say names that sounded unfamiliar. If they've never heard the name, they sound unfamiliar. Trust me when I say the name Tolkien originally to me was unfamiliar. But at some point, one of my in-laws sat there at Christmas at the dinner table and said, "Well, you know, all the Muslims are trying to kill us." And I tried not to laugh, but then I got a little smart alecky, and I said to my wife right in front of my in-laws, I said, "Hey, when Tolkien was staying with us over the last break, did she try to kill you? Because she didn't try to kill me. She was here 4 nights. She cooked a meal for us. She had the perfect opportunity." And I was doing this juxtapositioning, and I was doing this to try to use humor to expose that when a majority culture experiences something that it finds uncomfortable, that it's easy for media sources that want to sell you clicks, that want to get you more engaged to watch their shows for more ad revenue, whatever they're selling. It's easy for them to prey on fear and anger. It's easy for them to prey on. And again, when we're thinking about communicating across cultural difference, start with curiosity. Start with curiosity. I learned a lot from Tolkien, and I'm very thankful I did. And she had many, and also too, let me just say, I'm going to say this out loud, right? When I said Tolkien was Muslim, I wonder, and we can be honest about this in the chat, I wonder how you pictured she dressed. I wonder. I'm going to guess that how you pictured she dressed is influenced heavily by the way Muslims are portrayed in U.S. media. I'm going to imagine, as a matter of fact, I think this way too sometimes. When someone says, "Oh yeah, and my friend is Muslim," sometimes, pretty frequently, especially when I was younger, I pictured someone in a hijab, right? That was my picture, because that's the picture I had been presented my entire life about a community that I didn't have direct experience with. And Tolkien, if you saw Tolkien walking down the street in any city in the U.S., one would not be able to guess she was Muslim by the way she looks. So start with curiosity. Because and this requires us to suspend what we think is good, or sometimes professional. I used to work in career development centers, and people would say professional as though it was not a culturally bound concept. Professional is deeply culturally bound, right? If you know the history of work in the United States, Prior to World War II, the work world was dominated by white men, right? And white men made all these norms about what counts as professional and what doesn't. And then in World War II, more white women were entering the workforce. After World War II, more Black people, Latinx people were entering the workforce. And at no point did all corporations stop and go, hey, maybe we should reevaluate what we mean by professional, because the way we talked about professional was based in our norms. Not that that's necessarily bad. It could be bad, it could be good, could be neutral. But no matter whether it's bad, good, or neutral, if there weren't other people at the table who are now represented in your organizations, those norms about professional are now incomplete. They are incomplete. At the very least, they're incomplete. So starting with the fact that they're incomplete is starting from a vantage point of curiosity, right? That I can be curious about where did we get the idea of professional? And now that there are more people here who weren't here when we established the idea of professional, I'm curious if we could have a conversation about that. I literally was working with a corporate client yesterday, and we talked about the word professional. I said, you all in this space can sit around a table and you can decide what professional is at this company. You get to decide that. Don't let the media and how you were raised simply dictate that, because we were all raised differently. And it was a very, very diverse team of managers that I was working with. And so, but we need to have the conversations explicitly. So start with curiosity. The next one is seek to understand. Are there norms in other people's culture that seem weird to you? There was something great on Twitter, I think about 9 years ago, and I'm not active on Twitter now, but back in the day, there was this great moment. It was called Black People Ask White People Anything, and White People Ask Black People Anything. And I loved it. I loved it. I wish we would have more of this. It would be so cool to have trans people ask cis people anything, and cis people ask trans people anything. Or it would be cool to have men ask women anything, or women ask men anything. Although man, we got to watch it, because some of the ways we ask things lack our own cultural awareness that we've examined our own culture, right? And so, but it was great. And one of the ones that I will always remember is somebody, I think you who identified as Black, said something like, hey, white people, why did you conquer half the globe looking for spices, and yet you don't use spices in your food? And I thought that was just brilliant and hilarious, right? But so seeking to understand, asking questions. Here's the thing, though. I have to say this, because if you're part of a majority culture, and you're constantly relying on the one person you know who's from a minority culture, recognize that you're sort of asking them to do extra labor. You're asking them to do extra work to teach you about other cultures. And they're already doing work to navigate a system that's not built mainly for them, right? So a few ways to do this more responsibly would be to, if you have a question about a culture, read things written by people from that culture. Read things written by people from that culture about that culture. Read fiction works from people from other cultures that are not your own, and then grapple with, are there phrases or concepts that I don't quite understand? Oh, yes. Yeah, Dr. Marsh, you can't ask that. A friend of mine literally just recommended that to me. So I cannot wait to delve in on that. And so, because one of the things that does, one of the things is that when people from those minoritized cultures volunteer to share some of their culture and share some of their story, are not forced to, but when they volunteer to, like in this TV show, the show You Can't Ask That, it can be very empowering, right? And they're saying, and in many ways, this TV show is what I like about things like this, shows like this, web series like this, is that folks who are doing all kinds of uncompensated labor their entire life to explain if they're gay or bisexual, explaining to heterosexual people what the gay and bisexual community deals with regularly. That's uncompensated labor, and it has to be done over and over and over again by minoritized communities. But when you get it in a show or in a webinar, if you're not part of one of those communities, you can go watch it and you can get the knowledge that's already been created. While you're at it, if you find people who are from those marginalized communities who are taking their time to tell those stories, buy their stuff, but compensate them, because trust me, lots and lots and lots of times in their lives, they've done labor that they didn't get paid for. Part of my personal experience, and this is part of why I do this work, is growing up in North Carolina all the time. And I went to a relatively diverse high school. relatively diverse when it came to white students and black students. At the time, we did not have a lot of Latinx students or Asian students or indigenous students in particular. But I think my school is maybe 70% white students and 30% black students. And over and over and over again, I would watch my white teachers, when race came up, turn either overtly or turn in the little like subtle way to the black people in my class to ask them to pitch in on the conversation. Those black students were high school students. They're not getting paid. They're not getting paid to teach anybody anything. And yet, to help carve out a world that is ever so slightly more survivable for them, they have to do that labor. I'm going to say that one more time. For minoritized cultures to survive a world that is not built for them, to make the world a little bit more survivable for them and their people, the people who share their identities, they have to do that uncompensated labor. And we need to recognize it, compensate it, and then if you're on the other side of that identity, do work around it, right? As I tell people, white people invented racism. White people should be the primary people invested in uninventing racism, right? Cisgender people created transphobia. We should be active in challenging transphobia, et cetera, et cetera. And so, by the way, the same thing happened when I went to graduate school. I think we had one member of my cohort was out as gay. He was a gay man. And one of our professors, whenever LGBTQIA2S plus things would come up, would turn to that individual for like the inside scoop, right? And that person just had to teach part of the class, right? They were very gracious. I learned a lot from them, and they should have gotten paid. They should have gotten some money, right? So seeking to understand the way you do it is critical. The way you do it is critical, because if you're constantly going to your if you're white, your one black friend, or your one Latina friend, or if you're cisgender, your one trans friend, or your one non-binary friend, or if you're not currently disabled and you have a friend who's disabled, and you're constantly going back to them to make them do more work, be aware, and find other ways to do your homework. So one thing I'll tell you, and I'll kind of wrap up soon after this, so just bear with me for a couple more points here. But one time, and this is me being real, this is the realest I'm gonna be, right? I was at a conference once, and I met a person who was close to 6 feet tall, had a full beard, and a bright yellow sundress. And when I met that individual, because of how I grew up, I felt a little uncomfortable. I did. It's okay for me to say that, as long as I recognize that feeling, which is real, is way, 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 way down on the bottom shelf of the priority list. And the top 5 things on the priority list are that this person in front of me deserves human dignity, deserves protection under the law, deserves life, liberty, and happiness, deserves everything that I deserve, and that I recognize that they are swimming upstream and having to do extra work. So when I say that, when I met that person, I felt a little uncomfortable, I can think about that, and I can ask myself why, instead of letting some media say, oh, you're uncomfortable with that? Guess what? They are scary. I know you think they're scary. They're scary. Join us at 7 o'clock to find out more about how scary they are. So I could go that way, or I could go, why is it I felt uncomfortable? And I think I'm like, well, okay, most of the people I grew up with, when it came to gender expression, adopted pretty much all things that we considered masculine or all things that we considered feminine. I had friends in high school that were considered, one of the phrases we used back then was tomboy, which was women who didn't necessarily love sort of what society dictated to them was the most feminine way to dress, and challenged that, and by dressing a little bit more like the boys I knew in high school, right? But all of my life, I'm most used to and most comfortable with people who pick an entire set of gender expressions from one side of the menu or the other, right? Who are like, I'm going to pick a bunch of masculine symbols, or I'm going to pick a bunch of feminine symbols. And this person had symbols that, to me, in my culture, were kind of like at the cafeteria. They're like, well, this symbol seems masculine, this symbol seems feminine, and this person was living their life with all of these symbols, right? And if I can admit that, number one, I felt a little uncomfortable, that number two, my discomfort should never, ever, ever call into question this person's human dignity, their right to be protected under the law, their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, their right to be uplifted by everyone, to be celebrated as artists, or if they're an artist, or writers if they're writers, or doctors if they're doctors, or whatever they are. Uh, that I need to examine what it is that makes me uncomfortable and seek to understand that. So this is number two, seek to understand. What I can tell you is, when I see Scottish men wearing kilts, for some reason, I don't feel uncomfortable in the same way. If I saw a bearded Scottish man wearing a kilt, that's different from my experience of the individual who through conversation I learned to use the they pronoun. Different from that person that I met at that conference. And so I need to go to me. I need to have a conversation with me about why one is uncomfortable and one's not. If I'm not having that conversation with myself, I'm going to be susceptible to the media telling me that it's scary. Just like the media was telling people after 9/11 in the US that all Muslims were bad, or they were all nefarious, or they were all scary, or all violent, or whatever, which is of course not true, et cetera, right? And so the last thing is, and this we've already kind of talked about, but being aware of your own lenses. This is hard work. It's hard work, right? Thinking about your own thinking. But can you ask yourself, can you think about things that make you uncomfortable about other cultures, and not try to cover it with politeness, which the generation that raised me did that. For example, if anytime my mom said the word black referring to people, she whispered it. She'd be like, yeah, the new family right next to the Harrises, I think they're black. And I'm like, why are you whispering? Like, that part of my experience of white culture is that white culture prioritizes politeness over realness. I'm gonna say that one more time. Part of my experience of white culture is that it prioritizes politeness over realness, where I had relatives who would say things like, I don't know if I'm supposed to call them black or African American. I can't keep up with it. I'm like, okay. So I understand that you're having a conversation about politeness, but let's have a conversation about realness, which is whether or not you know the correct term. Do you recognize that you have privileges that they don't have, right? And so grappling with your own lenses is hard work. It's hard work. And so I would invite you to get out a piece of paper, write down all the identities that make you you: gender, race, class, sexual orientation, your faith tradition, your education status, your all of the things that make you you. And then put big old circles around which are the ones that make my life easier and which are the ones that make my life harder. Which are the ones that make things more convenient? Which are the ones that make things less convenient? Which are the identities that the systems in our country are built to support and built around the needs of? And which are the ones that aren't? And then once you've circled those, the ones that you know privilege you, once you do that, ask yourself, what the heck is that culture? What is able-bodied culture? But I don't know. I'm currently able-bodied. I might not be for my entire life. I don't know. But I do not need any hardware to get into any building. I do not need any hardware to get from the first floor to the second floor of any building. I do not need hardware or assistance to get me anywhere. What is able-bodied culture? Are there phrases? Trust me, I've done some thinking about this. If you've ever had a colleague and you said, hey, let's set up a standing meeting. Maybe you and your colleague are both currently able-bodied. Maybe you both do stand. But is the phrase standing meeting part of able-bodied culture? Right? If I say, oh, I'm going to reach out to you later, I can reach out. I have two arms. Does everybody? Right? A lot of times when I do keynotes, I used to regularly say, you know, see this, look at this, hear this, list, check, take a look at this, listen to this, etc. And I have to be more aware. that some people, sure, some people have vision and some people don't. Some people have hearing and some people don't. And the blind community and the deaf community are full communities, and it's harder for me to discern the cultural norms of the sighted community. What are things that I do in my language, thoughts that I think that are grounded in my participation as a sighted individual, a person with sight? Y'all, that is trippy. I mean, I know it's trippy. I mean, I'm being real, but it's trippy to think about. It's trippy to think about, but it's important to think about. It's important to think about. So, just to wrap up, I know we're getting close to time. By the way, for those of you who can see the slide, you may have seen, I don't know if y'all saw the Super Bowl halftime show, but let me just say this, that, the Super Bowl halftime show raised a lot of conversations on social media. And just zooming back, if the point of this webinar today is start with curiosity, seek to understand and be aware of your own lenses, I saw very little of that in the discourse about the Super Bowl halftime performance. As a matter of fact, when I watched it, I could hear the words. I could make sense of about half the words, but that has to do with me, not the artist. And those that I could make sense of included phrases, some of which made sense to me and some of which didn't. So what did I do? Did I get on social media and complain about how I couldn't understand half of what was being said, and even the things I could understand I didn't quite get or grasp? No. I started with curiosity. I Googled the lyrics. Come on, y'all. We're in the Google age. You can literally, I looked up the lyrics. I read the lyrics. And I was like, oh, I didn't catch that he said that. I didn't catch that he said, oh. And then did I still get all of the references? No. But did I get a lot more of the references? Yeah. And references I didn't get, you know what else I did? I looked them up too. Started with curiosity. Then when I said I took that next step, that next phase, I just said next step. That's part of able-bodied culture. Next step. I did the next phase, which is I sought to understand, which is phrases I didn't understand on their face. I looked up them too. And I said looked up. That's also, I guess, part of seeing culture and language. I checked on the internet on those too to seek to understand. And then I reminded myself, I didn't grow up listening to hip hop. I didn't grow up needing the messages of hip hop to reach ears to help make my community slightly safer. I didn't grow up in that way. And so because of that, I have to be aware of that. So that's my final slide. But real quick before you go, I just want to let y'all know we are doing a really, really cool event Tuesday, April 29th, 7 p.m. in the evening, East Coast time. I'm being joined by some amazing authors. It's called The Leadership Collision, Disruptive Thinking Meets Emotional Intelligence. I'm going to be joined by the amazing Dr. Danielle Green and Dr. Kelly Dixon, who are the authors of The Disruptive Leader. The Disruptive Leader also has some offerings from Dr. Chris Ray, JD, who is the president of a college in our state, and also president of his fraternity, the international president of his fraternity currently. And Dr. Green and Dr. Kelly Dixon are just amazing. And Dr. Kelly Dixon, everybody calls her Dr. K. Dr. K actually wrote the foreword to my book as well. And let me tell you real quick, as I've read these two books back to back, let me just say that the Disruptive Leader, in a lot of ways, if the Disruptive Leader is about purpose, it's about defining purpose or defining a goal or an outcome, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, my book, is a lot about how, the pedagogy, the path towards the destination. And so we didn't write these books together. And yet the fact that we released them around the same time, and Dr. K read mine, and I'm about a little more than halfway through hers and theirs. And I'm blown away at how connected they can be. And so right now you can get the book, shameless plug, you can get the book bundle on my website, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com. You save money if you get both of them because it saves us on shipping. But whether you've gotten both books or not, join us Tuesday, April 29th, and we're just going to have a candid conversation with the authors about these fantastic books. Anyway, thank you for joining me today. Next week, we will have another one of these, Thursday, 12 o'clock. You'll get a Google invite if you're on the Google side, LinkedIn invite, but you can go ahead to Adaptive Challenge Consulting on LinkedIn, and you can go ahead and RSVP to next week's. It's going to be really fun. And thank you. I know that today's conversation is not light, right? That it's a heavier conversation, but it has to be. And we are way past time to be having this level of conversation with this level of candor. And it's time. It's way past time. So thank you for joining. Thank you for the comments. This was fantastic. And yeah, I'll hopefully engage with you all next week. Take care.